All right, ready to dive in. This time we're tackling a big one, something I know we've both been thinking about a lot lately. What makes us human? And thankfully, we've got anthropologist Tim Ingold to help us unpack it.
And he really jumps right into the deep end, doesn't he? Takes on that label we all learned in school, Homo sapiens, sapiens, twice wise humans.
Yeah, it does feel, I don't know, a bit much like who are we to claim that kind of wisdom?
Exactly. And Ingold's point is that we often get so caught up in these labels and definitions that we miss the bigger picture.
So, how does he suggest we approach this question then? If not through those usual markers of being human, like walking upright or language.
Well, he argues that instead of focusing on what humans are, we should be looking at what we do, how we become human.
Becoming human. Okay, so it's a process, not a destination. I like
It
that.
is. It's like think about a building.
Okay.
We tend to focus on the finished structure, the concrete, the design, but Ingold would say, hold on, look at how the building is used, how it changes over time, how it interacts with the environment.
So it's not just this static thing, it's constantly evolving.
Exactly. And that's what's so important about this idea of becoming. It's a much more dynamic way to think about ourselves and our place in the world.
And it's not just about buildings, is it? Ingold takes this idea of becoming and applies it to everything, even knowledge itself.
He does. He wants us to rethink those concepts too, to see them not as fixed, unchanging things, but as being just as dynamic as we are.
So instead of knowledge being this set of facts neatly filed away in our brains, it's more like, what, a river, always flowing, changing course.
He actually compares the mind to a forest.
A forest. Okay, now that's an image I wasn't expecting.
Right, classic Ingold. But it makes sense when you think about it. Just like a forest, the mind isn't this neatly organized space. It's a complex, interconnected network, constantly growing and changing in response to, well, everything.
So every book we read, every conversation, every experience, it all shapes the landscape of our minds.
Yeah.
It's like we build these little boxes in our minds, right? And say, okay, biology goes here, philosophy goes there, and never the twain shall meet.
It's so true. And Ingold is really pushing back against that kind of fragmentation. He sees it as a major obstacle to truly understanding, well, anything.
Because it's all connected, right?
Exactly. And those connections are so important. But we often miss them because we're so focused on drawing these artificial lines between different areas of knowledge.
So how do we move beyond that? How do we break down those walls and start seeing those connections more clearly?
Well, one key move Ingold makes is shifting from talking about interaction to correspondence.
Okay, I intrigue. What's the difference?
So interaction suggests that you have these separate, distinct things that are coming together, bumping up against each other.
Right, like billiard balls or something.
Exactly. But correspondence implies a more fluid, ongoing relationship. He uses the example of a river flowing through a landscape.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The river, like that line of becoming we were talking about, is constantly shaping and being shaped by the terrain it flows through.
It's a two-way street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what correspondence is all about. It's this ongoing, dynamic relationship where things are constantly influencing and being influenced by each other.
It reminds me of that old saying, no man is an island. It's like no idea is an island either.
I love that. And it's not just about ideas, is it? This concept of correspondence applies to everything. Ingold argues that it's a more helpful way to understand relationships between cultures, between individuals, even between humans and the natural world.
So instead of seeing ourselves as separate from nature, we're acknowledging that we're part of this interconnected web. And every action, every choice creates ripples that spread out through the whole system.
Exactly. It's a powerful way to think about our place in the world and the impact we have on each other and everything around us. And it really challenges that traditional narrative, doesn't it? The one that puts humans at the top of some kind of hierarchy.
Right, like we're somehow separate from or above nature. But if we embrace this idea of correspondence, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where does that leave us on our own individual journeys? It's like we're all on these paths, right? But the paths aren't fixed. They're always being formed as we walk them.
It's true. And maybe instead of trying to predict where we'll end up, the focus should be more on, I don't know, really experiencing each step along the way.
Being present in the process, yeah. And realizing that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong path, just different ways of becoming.
Absolutely. And that's something else I find so exciting about Ingold's work. It's not about giving us a set of rules to follow or boxes to check. It's about encouraging us to think differently, to question our assumptions.
To look closer at things we might normally overlook.
Exactly. Like, remember when we were talking about those defining characteristics of humans? Ingold even challenges that with something as seemingly insignificant as the shape of our noses.
Yeah, it seemed like such a small detail at first.
Right. But when you dig deeper, you realize it has these huge implications for how we understand our own evolution, our relationship to other animals. It shows that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Always more to learn, more to discover. So if we try to bring this all together, this idea of correspondence, of becoming, how do we actually live that out in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't know if there's a single answer, but maybe, just maybe, the best approach is to embrace that uncertainty.
To be okay with not having all the answers.
Exactly. To be open to new experiences, new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world, because ultimately that's what this whole becoming thing is all about, isn't it? It's about constantly learning, growing, evolving alongside everything and everyone around us.
And realizing that our journeys, both individually and collectively, are never truly finished. It's always more to explore, more to understand. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Already, it feels like we just scratched the surface.
I know, right? But that's the beauty of these conversations. They always leave us with more questions than answers. And hopefully they inspire our listeners to keep exploring these ideas, keep asking those questions, and keep those minds curious. Thanks for joining us.